Well, welcome to the Snap Society. Today I've got Bryan Caporicci with me, and he is going to bring so much clarity to us on pricing. He gives us great step-by-step tips and a formula, and make sure that you listen to the very end, because I think one of his very best tips is at the end. He has a great heart, and I'm so glad that I've met him through the Snap Society. I can honestly say that I consider him a friend, and he is incredible. So make sure you watch this interview all the way through and share it with a friend. Hey, Bryan, welcome to the Snap Society.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you. Okay, we're going to be talking about pricing and sales in photography. So I want to pick your brain about this, because I feel like a lot of people, when they're starting out with their business, they're starting out because they love the art of photography. And so they think, oh, I'll just start a business here. But then they really undercut themselves. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So you hit the nail on the head there. It's you know, we get into photography because we like the creative side of photography, but we don't realize when we're starting that we're actually getting into the business of photography. Mm-hmm. And the business of photography is very different than the creative, artistic side of photography. And so a lot of the times there's a huge disjoint there, because photographers don't maybe have a business background, they don't have the training or the knowledge or the skills in business. And so often photographers will spin their wheels not knowing exactly where they need to go, and you know, that they don't know what to do to take their things to the next level. And often we think it's things like improving your photography. Mm-hmm. And certainly improving your photography has a big effect on improving our business and improving what we can deliver to clients. But ultimately, if you can't get people to put money in your pocket for your photography, then we're not really running a business anymore. We're just doing a hobby. And so I think that's where a lot of photographers struggle. Right.
And I know that people start off as a hobby, and then they want to make money off of it, but they have another job. And then they soon realize, you know what, I cannot quit my day job and make a living off of photography. And it's because of their pricing, really. That's where it ends off, because they really could. So tell us about that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually think that the converse is just as true as well. I think that a lot of photographers try to go full-time at it because either, you know, they feel like they're very strong photographically, they're mm-hmm. great artists, and they go full-time into photography and then realize, holy cow, I'm not making any money, and I need to go back and get a day job because I'm not making a living from photography. And so I have a huge passion in that side of photography. I am a wedding and portrait photographer, so I definitely love the creative and the artistic side. Don't get me wrong, I have a huge passion there. But I love the business of photography just as much, because it really is 70 to 80% of what we do, business, as opposed to the actual shooting and the photography. I often have, you know, a co-op student come in, or an employee, or when I'm meeting with newer photographers in the area, I meet with a lot of new photographers because I'm the chair for our branch of Professional Photographers of Canada. So whenever we have a new member, I always try to get together with them and just, you know, talk shop and see what their business is like. And a lot of the times, you know, when you have a co-op student or whatever, you're talking and they're saying, well, when do you shoot? And I say, well, I don't shoot every day, every hour of the day. That's not realistic. And I think that is an expectation that needs to be set with newer photographers, is that, 80% of your work week is going to be filled with business and marketing and accounting and finances and social media and emailing and all the other stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Yeah, people don't realize that. That's so true. Yep. So what would you say is one pricing mistake that people are making? Or photographers are making? The biggest mistake that I would say photographers make when establishing their pricing is that they don't really think about what actually goes into a product or a service of theirs. Okay. So the classic example, I know that it's used all the time, but when a client calls your studio and says, how much are your prints, or how much is an 8x10 print? A lot of the times when photographers are figuring out and setting their prices, and they're trying to price an 8x10 print, for example, they say, oh, well, it costs me, you know, $3.50 for my lab, and so I probably really should double or triple that to make some money. And so I think, you know, pricing it at around, you know, $11 or $12 sounds about right to me. Right. And you don't realize, like, when you really get down to the mechanics of pricing and you calculate exactly what really goes into your products and your services, when you price it like that, you're actually paying your clients to give them a print, you know?
Yeah.
Like there's so many wedding photographers, for example, that, you know, they start at maybe $1,000 or $1,500 for their wedding services. And I mean, believe me, I totally get, Jamie, that you have to start somewhere, right? So
Right.
you
Right.
can't just come out of the gate with a $4,000 starting price. I get you have to start somewhere. But if you're charging $1,000 or $1,500, if you were really to do the math in terms of what goes into the average wedding coverage, you're probably not making any money. If anything, you're probably paying your client
Right.
to photograph their wedding.
Right.
You would actually make more money working at McDonald's serving, you know, hamburgers and fries. And no disrespect there, but I mean, we get into business for ourselves because we want to have flexibility and financial freedom, right?
Yep.
And
Right.
a lot of photographers can't quite get there because they're making less than minimum wage.
Right. Well, and I think that what you said about, taking the print and tripling that, that seems very logical because if you own a store or a boutique, that's what you do is you triple it, right? Well, that you can't do that with a print. And then, I remember when I really upped my prices quite a bit from, tripling my print cost. And the men especially would say, it's just a piece of paper. Why is it so
Right.
expensive?
Right.
And I think one of the mistakes is that you don't have an answer for that. It's not just a piece of paper,
Right.
So I definitely agree with you on that. It's not as logical. Pricing is not as logical in photography as it may be for a store that you have products.
Right. Now that being said, I actually think that there is a very mathematical, algebraic, logical approach to pricing photography because I think to come at it, and it's interesting because in the industry there is a lot of education and knowledge about selling on emotion and those kinds of things. And believe me, I totally get it. We'll get to that conversation when it comes to selling because I think that's a really good place to be. But I think when you're establishing pricing, it definitely does make sense to have some kind of approach to it, some kind of repeatable system
Yes.
in terms of how you're going to price your work, because otherwise you can't just pull numbers out of thin air because
Right.
then A, you can't justify them, and B, there's no way of tracking or knowing whether it's profitable or not for you.
Yes.
So the way that I like to look at it and the way that I teach when I give lectures and give workshops, and in the book that I wrote, Pricing for Profit, I co-wrote with another photographer in the area, Robert Noel, we go through the mechanics of pricing. And I think it's really as simple as this. Calculate what truly goes into a print. So if we go back to the example of the 8x10 print and we say, okay, so it's $3.50 from our lab. That
Right.
is the hard cost of the actual print. But let's now pull back and calculate everything else that goes into it. The time that we spend to order the print, the time that we spend when we're retouching the print, the time that we spend when we're actually dragging the file on our computer to the Rose system at our lab, the shipping costs that it takes from the lab, how much time that we sit and unpackage the print and then package it back up for our client,
Right.
the amount of money that goes into that packaging that we just put everything together in. Now that in and of itself is a good discussion because how are we to charge premium boutique prices if we're just taking a print and putting it into a manila envelope and giving it to our client?
Right.
Presentation is very, very important, and that's definitely a huge part of the perceived value of the products that we give out. So sort of to continue that, we also have to factor in when we meet with our client to give them the prints, well, we're spending time there as well, aren't we? And so
Right.
it's all these factors that go into it that photographers sometimes don't think about.
Right.
But you have to pay yourself. I mean,
Yes.
you have to be accounting for the amount of money that would go into paying an employee, for example, to do that work.
Right.
I mean, we are technically employees of our company, right? And so
Yes.
I think we have to factor in all that. So once you actually go through all those mechanics and add all those things up, it's not unreasonable, if we stick with our example of an 8x10 print, it's not unreasonable to think that an 8x10 print could actually cost us $25 or $30 by
Yeah.
the time we factor all the time and all the
Absolutely.
expenses that have gone into it. And so then if you take that same model and you figure, what markup factor do you want to have as a photographer? There's a lot of discussion that can go into that and a lot of mathematical formulas that go into it. As a rule of thumb, I always recommend to home-based photographers to have a markup of 2.85.
Okay.
And I recommend to retail-based photographers, so if you have a commercial space, a markup of 3.5. So that means
Okay.
that whatever you end up coming to is your actual cost, your cost of goods for a certain product, multiply that by 2.85, and that additional 2.85 will give you the room that you need to pay for things like overhead, to pay for things like
Okay.
equipment, like education, like association fees, everything else, taxes,
Right.
employee wages if you have employees, sorry. So all those things need to be factored in there, and that comes out of that 2.85% markup. So if we
Okay,
look at our
so
example, sorry, go on.
oh, okay, so the 2.85, and you were going to
Yep.
say this, I think. So if we look at our example and we decided it's $25 or $35 for an 8 by 10, then we add the 2.85 on top of that?
Exactly. So then you take that
Okay.
number, multiply it by 2.85. Now,
Okay.
so what has that done for us? That's basically set us up to A, cover all of our costs,
Yes.
B, make sure we're being paid for the time that we put into
Yes.
something, and C, it gives us enough room to cover all of our overhead and our expenses and to create a sustainable long-term business. And
Yes.
so when you look at that model, I mean, just at throwing rough numbers around, 25 or $30 at your 2.85 markup, that puts, I'm not good at quick mental math, but that puts your price somewhere around 60 or $65
Mm-hmm.
for an 8 by 10 print. Now, I don't think that that is unreasonable for an 8 by 10 print.
Right.
And again, when a client says, well, it's just a piece of paper, it's very easy for us to explain that it isn't just a piece of paper, it's all the work that goes into it.
Right.
All the work that we've done before and after and retouching and packaging and all these other things. And then you see this beautiful studio that you're sitting in. How does this get paid for? I mean, there's all these
Right.
things that go into it. And so I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that almost any business, or I would say any business, goes through that exact same
Right.
formula. Tim Hortons, for example, the coffee cup itself is probably only what, a penny for the amount of coffee cups that Tim Hortons makes.
Uh-huh.
The actual liquid that they pour into their coffee cup is probably another penny. So okay, so Tim Hortons cost of goods is technically only 2 cents. Why are they charging us $1.35 for a medium? Well, it's because it's everything else that goes into it. They have to pay their employee to sit there and take your order. They have to pay for the
Right.
cash registers. They have to pay for the time to pour the coffee. They've factored all these things in, and Tim Hortons as a company needs to make profit. So all these things go into it. There's no reason that we can't be going through those same kinds of calculations for our
Right.
photography
Now,
businesses.
I forgot to let everybody know that Brian is from Canada. And so I don't think we know what Tim Hortons is. Is that like a
Oh,
Starbucks?
no, you didn't just say that. My Canadian friends, tell me we have some Canadian listeners right now. Yeah, so Tim Hortons is sort of the Canadian version of Starbucks, I suppose. We do have Starbucks here
Okay.
as well. It's sort of less of a boutique version of Starbucks, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. In the comment section, we'll have people say if they're from America or Canada.
Okay, good.
So they
Yes,
can
yes. I
let
like
us know.
that.
Okay, that's great. And you're right. You took something that doesn't seem very logical and you did turn it to be something that is more logical, because I think that so many people don't factor in time. And, when you're factoring in time and the cost of goods of other things beyond just the print, and then on top of that, you're adding that 2.8. I love how you do that to make it so much more concrete, because I am a bit more of a concrete thinker when it comes to this kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I like having a formula. So I love that. That's great.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing that we have to think about too. If we're, I mean, we're running a business, right? And any business goes through these kinds of discussions and internal conversations, or even external sometimes. If you're going to open up a gym, or you're going to open up a coffee shop, or I mean, whatever you're going to open up, you have to calculate these things. You can't just open up a gym and say, membership sounds good at about $10 a month. Yeah, I
Right.
think that, because then eventually you're going to get to the point where you realize, wow, we're not making any money, and your gym is going to close down. That doesn't happen in that kind of industry. So why do we as photographers feel like we have the liberty to just pick numbers out of thin air
Right.
and not actually make some sense out of it? And so I love the approach of A, figuring out what goes into a product or a service, B, having a repeatable system for calculating a price, and then from there we can use other factors to determine the price. For example, an 8 by 10 print, maybe we want to have a lower perceived value on an 8 by 10 print versus a 20 by 30 canvas print. And so if
Okay.
we were to go through that whole formula, maybe we might find that a 20 by 30 canvas print technically should be priced at $145, whereas an 8 by 10 print should be, technically priced at $65. Well, of course, the perceived value of this giant, beautiful 20 by 30 finished canvas gallery wrap is much higher than a loose 8 by 10 print. And so
Right.
we might want to increase the markup on that, or increase the price on your canvas print to increase its perceived value. So, I mean, we do want to consider those other factors, but I think that going off of a cost of goods model is a good place to start.
Yes. And I love what you said about making those decisions beforehand. I think for me, it was a money mindset. You know, I did not get into that mindset before I did it or before I got started. I sort of just jumped into this, and I think a lot of people do. And so I think it's really important for you to get to a point where you yourself are sold on your prices
Yeah,
and really
totally.
believe that you are worth what you're charging. I think that's so, so important.
Jamie, have you read my book Pricing for Profit by chance?
I have
Because
not.
you actually just hit on one of the other factors that we discuss about influencing factors for pricing, confidence. Confidence is huge.
Oh,
If
wow.
we go through all these calculations and we figure out that, let's say that we do a similar calculation for a portrait session, and we figure out that that our portrait session fee for just our time should be $500, right?
Okay.
A lot of photographers aren't at the place in their business yet where they're confident enough in their work to charge $500 for the 1 hour session fee. Now, of
Right.
course, we know 1 hour doesn't really mean 1 hour. There's all the other
Right.
work that goes into it, as we've discussed. But again, confidence is huge. If you're not confident in your pricing, then you shouldn't be pricing yourself that way.
Yes.
A client can feel it and can see it when you're sitting across the table from them and they say, "How much are your wedding albums?" If you kind of like, you know, $2,000 and you're
Right.
kind of like
Right.
hesitant about it, then they're going to see that and feel that, and they're not going to have confidence in you. But
Hmm.
if you can confidently say, "My wedding album price is $2,000," then they're going to feel that, and they're going to know that it's worth it, and they're going to
Yes.
feel it as well. So yeah, confidence is huge.
Yes. Yes. I totally agree. And I definitely felt like I went through that whole, phase of not being confident and being nervous and really almost apologizing for my prices when I'm giving,
Right.
people telling them my prices, to now where I'm just very matter of fact. And it's like, you know what, if you don't want to pay for my prices, then you need to find somebody else, because I know my work is worth it. I put everything into this work and it is absolutely worth it. But I didn't come out of the gates feeling that way,
No, no, and I think that that's where definitely I like to remind when I speak about these topics. Definitely, it's easy for me to sit here and say this from where I am. I've been a professional photographer now for 9 years, and so I'm at the place where I am confident in my work. I'm confident in my abilities. I have a reputation, and I can charge what I need to charge. And definitely for a photographer coming into the industry as a newer photographer, like I said, they have to consider things like the quality they're producing, their perceived value, and their confidence in their pricing. And so they may not be able to exactly take this formula and replicate it in every sense of their business, but definitely it's a good place to start.
Yes. Okay, so we could talk about this forever, but I want to move on to something that I think is so important for our listeners to hear, and that is in-person sales. So this is something that is near and dear to me, because when I switched over to in-person sales, my income rose so much more. And I don't know, I think a lot of people listening could possibly be stay-at-home mothers and people who are doing this on the side. And when I started out, I had a gallery and they had a password and they could get into the gallery and then they would order. And for me, that was very convenient, and that worked out with my, where I was at in my family life. And as my kids got older, I heard of this whole in-person sales, and I didn't really know what it was. And so it totally changed everything about the way I do sales, though. So I would love to hear about your in-person sales.
Yeah, totally. So let me start by saying that sales, like pricing and like these other business discussions that we've talked about, is something that's scary for a lot of photographers. And a lot of photographers aren't comfortable in that space. They hear the word sales and they think of, a used car salesman, or they
Right.
think that
Yeah.
that they don't want to feel slimy, or they don't want to feel like they're having to, sell somebody on something. And I think
Yes.
that the term sales has gotten a really bad rap. I think if we instead look at it in the sense of we're trying to get people what they ultimately want and give it to them in the best way that we can give it to them. That's sort of
Yes.
what sales is, right? And
Yes.
it's important for us to remember that whether we're in business or not, or whatever business we're in, we're always selling. We're always in a position of having to show the benefits of something and convince somebody else into thinking the way that we think. And I mean, that's true if you have kids. You're trying to convince your kids to eat their vegetables. If you have a spouse and you're trying to convince your wife to watch the movie that you want to watch versus
Right.
the movie that they want to watch. I mean, we're always in this
Persuasion.
position, persuasion, right? And that's the position that we're in. And I think that it's okay to sell in business. and it's okay to think of ways to maximize your sales and to optimize your sales. It's really interesting when photographers say that they don't want to sell, or they don't want to be in a position where they have to sell a client. The way that I look at it, when I have a meet and greet, I call my consultations for wedding clients and meet and greets.
Okay.
And so when I have somebody come into my studio to consider hiring me as a photographer, I like to think of it this way. I know my abilities as a photographer. I know the experience that I provide to my wedding clients. I know the products that I provide. I know that I'm very confident in my abilities, and I'm probably, after I meet with a client, if I know that I'm the right photographer for them, and I know that I can provide the best wedding photographs for them out of any photographers in the area, wouldn't it almost in a way be a disservice to that client if I didn't try to convince them that way?
Right.
Right. And it's funny to think of it that way because we don't think of it that way. But in my opinion, it's almost a disservice if you don't try to sell. Like, for example, if we're talking about print sales, because I think that's sort of where we were going, for in-person sales, a lot of the times clients will come in, and I'm sure that you've had this, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have had this. A lot of clients will come in and say, oh yeah, I want to have a nice picture blown up. You say, great. And they say, yeah, nice big old 8x10.
Yeah.
And you're like, a big old 8x10. What are you talking about? That's not a big,
that's not even on my wall. It's on my,
seriously, that's like, I've got an 8x10 in my pocket right now, It's like, but the reality of it is, like, think of it this way. Okay, so, we don't want to go into sales. But, like, take an 8x10 piece of paper and put it on the wall. Like, that's obviously, we know that. If we show it to our clients, they know that that's not really an appropriate size to put on their wall. That's not like, if you were to say, I don't want to sell and just accept that, you would kind of in a way be doing a disservice to them, wouldn't you? Because you're ultimately giving them something that is substandard. It's not going to be appropriate for they're displaying it, and so ultimately, they're not going to be happy in the long run. So if we change our mindset and say we're ultimately just trying to get them what's appropriate for their wall, and that's a great way to approach it.
Right.
So that's the psychology of sales, and that's sort of just a quick little kind of rant to say, listen, like it's okay to be in sales and it's okay to sell. We just have to do it in an appropriate way, in a no pressure manner, and in a way that ultimately gets our clients what they want to have. And that's sort of the way that I like to look at sales, and that's how I like to teach sales, because it's okay to approach it that way.
Well, and I think for me, I can remember before I did in-person sales, for one, it was not very gratifying because here I've spent all this time taking these people's pictures. I've edited the pictures. I love the pictures. I mean, I fall in love with every session that I do, and every session is my new favorite. And then I don't get to see the reaction. I don't get to see the expressions. They're seeing it on their computer, and I'm at home. I have no idea what they're thinking. The other thing about that too that I noticed is when we would talk over the phone and, they're trying to decide over this or that, and I'll say, actually, I really loved this one because of this, that, and the other thing. Well, then they fall in love with it too. And they're like, oh, I didn't even notice that before. When I'm doing in-person sales, I do a lot of that. I point out the things to them that they never even saw. And anyways, it's more gratifying for one. And I feel like it helps bring the customer to a place of appreciation of different photos than they would have picked on their own. So I feel like it's a huge service, I feel like, for them.
And the other thing that I think we need to consider as photographers, our clients are hiring us for our expertise. We are professional photographers.
Yes.
We do this all the time for many clients. And so our opinion and our expertise and our experience certainly counts for something, I would think. Outside of just clicking the button and taking the picture.
Right.
Our experience in terms of sizing, in terms of putting images together for a collection, in terms of designing storyboards or designing albums, or appropriately sizing an image for the wall. Our experience and our knowledge and our skills in those areas are very important. Yes. And so there's no way that we can inject our experience and our expertise if we just email an online gallery and say, go wild with it. The other thing to consider with online galleries is clients are in a very distracted state when they're there. They're sitting in front of their computer, just like maybe your listeners are right now. And are we the only thing that's on your listeners' minds right now? Probably not. I would say that if you're listening to this right now, you probably are either in Lightroom as well, or you're in Photoshop, or you're browsing the internet, or you're on Facebook, or you're texting, or you've got your son or daughter with you, whatever it is. There's distractions when we're behind our computer. We don't have single focus. That's why they call it multitasking. We don't have single focus on a computer. And so if we were to just give our clients an online gallery and expect them to make the best decision, it's probably not going to happen because they're going to be distracted. You're not going to have your influence on the decision, and they're going to just do whatever they think that should be done with no influencing factors. So definitely in-person sales are very, very important. A lot of photographers say, well, I don't have a studio, I don't have a business space, so what do I do? In my opinion, having a space to have clients come to you is definitely the best option. But it's not the only option. There's so many things that we can do. Anything is better than just emailing an online gallery and letting them go crazy with it, right? So definitely I would say that having a space, a dedicated space where your clients can come to you, where you can set the scene, you can have visual merchandising, you can create this experience for them. That's the best way to do it. But like I said, it's not the only way. And so a lot of your listeners, maybe they're not at the point where they have a studio to invite people to. So instead, maybe another option would be, why don't you go to their home? Why don't you go right into your client's house, either bring a laptop, or if you want to take your game to the next level, buy a projector and bring a projector and actually project it on their walls. What a great way to get into their home and get into a personal space for them. But B, think of it this way. If they're ordering prints for their walls and you're sitting there in their living room with them, there's not really an out for them. You know?
Right.
If they say something like, oh, yeah, we don't really have any room, you could say, well, what about this wall over here? There's a beautiful space above your couch that I'm sitting on.
Yes.
And then now, A, you can have influence on that, but B, you could also say something like, oh, well, now that I've seen your home, I think that you'd have a great storyboard up on this wall, or I think that this frame would go really well over here, or I think that we could hang a nice collage over here on your staircase. Like, you can have those influencing decisions when you go to their space.
Yes, and that's actually what I do. I mean, I go to people's homes, and they really love that I can, because I didn't start doing that, and then I got requests to go to their homes because they're like, I just don't know where I'm going to put these pictures or where I'll put this canvas. And so this is something that I started out doing slowly. And I was just like, oh, I can come over. I can help you with that. And now it's just a part of the service is that I go into their home and I help them figure out where they're going to put it. So I actually do all my in-person sales in the home.
That's awesome.
For that reason.
And I know a lot of photographers, even if they do have a studio space or a professional space to meet with clients, they'll still offer that option. And I think that's really smart because A, what great service is that? Like you're making it very convenient for your clients. You're taking away one of the objections that we may have to set up an in-person sales appointment. They don't have to come to you. You'll go to them.
Right.
And like I said, B, I think there's a lot of benefits to being in their home.
Okay, so let's wrap up here. Do you have anything else you want to say about in-person sales?
ProSelect.
Okay, tell me about that.
That's it. ProSelect is a software by a company called Time Exposure. They're based in Australia. They are sort of the industry standard for in-person sales software. So basically, in a nutshell, what ProSelect does, you import all the images from a session into ProSelect, and then using the software, you can A, show a slideshow, which is great with music to get them emotionally attached to the images, but B, you can walk through the process of narrowing down the images. And the software is designed to make that process very easy. You have three columns, yes, maybe, and no. And it's very easy to use. You put the images as you go through them individually into the appropriate columns. And then from there, the best part of the software is you can show the images, A, sized appropriately, and B, you can actually place them in a room. So really quickly, like in a nutshell, what I mean by that is, on my projector in my studio downstairs, I have it all, calibrated properly, and it's very easy to calibrate in the software. When a client says, I want to do a 30 by 40 print, I can actually click a button, and it'll show that print actually sized 30 inches by 40 inches. Wow. So it's an amazing tool to show what they're actually going to be getting. And it's an amazing tool to also unsell other products. So for example, when you start, we started the conversation earlier by saying an 8x10 print. If a client says I want an 8x10 print, and then I go and press the button to show them an 8x10 print, and when they're looking at a 105-inch projection screen and it looks like it's a wallet print on there, they're going to quickly realize, oh yeah, okay, that's definitely too small.
Yes.
So it's a great sales tool in that sense. You can then step up from there and say next size, next size, next size, and then they can pick a size that makes sense for them, and you're actually showing the physical size, which is amazing. The second part of that is you can actually show images, again, sized appropriately, but in a room. So you can buy templates from ProSelect, where it's like a sample living room or a sample bedroom or a sample office, or better yet, you could get a picture of the room from your clients. So the actual room that they're planning on
Cool.
hanging the prints, and then you can show that image hanging in that room and on that
Okay.
wall.
Okay, and that's
That's an
called Pro
amazing sales
Select.
tool. It's called Pro Select. So definitely, if you're going to get into in-person sales, Pro Select is the first thing that you need to go and buy. I mean, besides buying a projector.
Right, right.
That's the next thing
That's
that you
kind
want
of
to be doing.
important.
Right.
Bryan, thank you so much for sharing all this. So, we were talking before the show about something really exciting that you have going on. So, I want you to tell us all about it.
Yeah, cool. I'm really excited because we just launched an educational site for photographers that focuses solely on the business side of being creative.
Okay.
And like we've talked about here, Jamie, a lot of photographers don't enjoy that side of it, or either
Yes.
aren't educated in it, or a lot of the resources that are out there, the books that we read, the Seth Godins, all these things, they're very broad. And so
Yes.
there wasn't sort of one place that focused on actionable, consistent, tangible, down to earth, real life, concrete business ideas for photographers. And so that's what we launched, a website dedicated just to the business side of photography. It's called Sprouting Photographer, and you can find it at sproutingphotographer.com.
Okay.
Like I mentioned earlier, I wrote a book called Pricing for Profit. I would love to give your listeners a discount on that if they're interested in checking it out.
Oh, we would love that. Yes.
Everything that we've talked about today in terms of pricing, the mechanics, how we broke down cost of goods and all that, we go into that in detail, and definitely be happy to share that with them. On our website, sproutingphotographer.com, we do have a couple of free calculators. So for example, how we talked about today, the idea of how to price an 8x10 print, we have that as a free calculator that your listeners can go and check out. They can put all of their variables, what their price is, how much time goes into it, all these things.
Oh, amazing.
And it'll actually say, hey, I think you should charge this for an 8x10 print.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my goodness. That totally takes the guesswork out of everything.
Exactly. So
Wow.
definitely happy to share that. That's a free resource on the website, sproutingphotographer.com. And if you want to get more into the mechanics of how that works, then the book, Pricing for Profit, that we wrote is a good place for that.
Okay, great. So if you want $5 off Pricing for Profit, then just become a Snap Society member, and our newsletter will go out, and we'll give you a code for that. So I think that is I can't wait to read it, because I think I'm going to gain a lot of knowledge from that. And I love what you're doing with, the Sprouting Photographer?
Sprouting Photographer, yeah.
Yes, I love that. Okay, great. So everybody head on over there. All right, Bryan, thank you so much for being with us today. I love talking to you, and I hope that we get to have you on again sometime soon.
Yeah, for sure. Be happy to come and share some more thoughts. Thanks, Jamie.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us here at the Snap Society, where everything clicks.